I wonder how long you can sit on that at a time. Okay, to relieve that guy of his misery, let's downsample the image. This should be half the original size, that is half width, half height. Once more, and a third time. Let's do the same with the blur and downsample function. Alright, now we have two images, 1/8 the original size. Let's view the downsampled image, magnified to the original size. And let's compare that with the other image. Implement the two functions and compare the results. You know what they'll look like. The first one is very easy. Octave and MATLAB make it really trivial to specify indices repeating at a given step. In this case, we would like to start with row 1, step 2, and till the end. Exactly the same for columns. This selects rows and columns 1, 3, 5, and so on. Okay, now for blurring. Remember how we used IMFilter? Pass in an image and a filter defined here using the fSpecial function. As mentioned, we want a Gaussian of size 5 by 5. Alright, so this is our filtered image. We simply use the same indexing as before. Make sense? Let's see what it looks like. Alright, here's the result of only downsampling. And this is with blurring and downsampling. This appears to be a more natural, blurred version of the original image, whereas the former has ugly aliasing effects. Note that the result is being affected by how the resize function works. You can control how it functions using a third parameter. Here, passing in nearest means no interpolation. As you can see, this is a much more accurate representation of what the pixels in the 1/8 size image look like. By the way, this is the downsampled image. Compare this with the blurred and downsampled version. It still wins. You can also use linear or bicubic, which is the default. Try these out. We'll be using downsampling to build Gaussian pyramids next.
Image pyramids, the phrase was popular back in the late 70s, early 80s. Paper that made it really famous was the Burton Adelson, same Ted Adelson that I showed you an example of from before in terms of some visual illusions. And they built something called a Gaussian pyramid. And a Gaussian pyramid is just this reduction, just like I told you before. One of the things we can do with Gaussian images or these reduced images is we can also create something called bandpass images. And having this ability to do both Gaussian and bandpass lets you deal with scale very well, which is why I want to show you this a little bit here. So what you have here is, it says Gaussian pyramid, and it is a Gaussian pyramid, but it's blown back up again, all right? In fact, remember these pictures where I'm showing you the different Van Goghs, and it says half resolution, quarter, and eighth, but they're the same size? That's because I blew up the eighth size one back up to the original size, so you could see it, right? So it would look the same way, all right? So here, I did the same thing. This is our Lena picture that we talked about before. And this is the original, then blurred and subsampled, and then blown back up again. Blurred, subsampled, blown again. So these are the lower and lower resolution images. What I can do is, I can subtract one picture from another to get this difference. All right? So this is a difference image. Two things. First of all, this is called the Laplacian, and you should know why. If you remember when we did the detections, and we first did Harris corners, and then we talked about the SIFT detectors, David Lowe was talking about using extrema points in scale space, and we said, well, one of the things you could do is you could run a Laplacian over different scales, or you could take different Gaussians and subtract them. Those were the difference of Gaussians. And difference of Gaussians was approximately the same as a Laplacian. That's why these images are called Laplacian images. Okay? They're also approximately bandpass. And we talked about this just a little bit when we talked about Fourier analysis. But the idea is that the lowest frequency, if this is frequency here, has a fall off like that. So the next one, if it had higher frequency, might look like that. And if I subtract these two, basically I'm mostly going to be looking at that space. So this is the power of the frequency. And so when you take a Gaussian blurred image and you subtract from that another Gaussian blurred image that's close but not the same amount of blurring, you get this section of frequency that you're looking at. It's not totally bandpass because stuff leaks out this side and stuff leaks out that side, but that's why they're called, in quotes, bandpass filtering. So these images here, these are called the Laplacian images. What's kind of cool about the Laplacian images is you can actually use them to reconstruct the original image if you have one thing. So what's that one thing you have to have? You have to have the power. No. What you have to have is the smallest of the original blurred Gaussian, the top of the Gaussian pyramid. Reason I have to have that is if I take this and I add back in this, I'll get this one. Here, let me draw in Lena here like that. Put in her hat and her eyes and her nose. Yeah, there she is. All right. Well, once I have that, I can add that to this and get a finer version of Lena. And then I can add this and get back the original. Okay? So the Laplacian pyramid plus the coarsest of level from the Gaussian pyramid allows me to do reconstruction. All right. Keep going on this a little bit to show you how to do the construction of the Laplacian pyramid, because you're going to use exactly the same steps for building a Laplacian pyramid you're going to use to run hierarchical Lucas and Canati. That's why we're doing this, so we can get over here. You got that? Good. Here is an awful picture. But its picture comes from the paper, and it'll show you what we're doing. So this is our original picture, I equals G0. And in Laplacian pyramid, the 0 level is the finest level. And that way, you always have the 0 level, and 1 would be filtered down once, level 2 is filtered second time, level 3. And you can filter as many times as you want to, up to n, for n being some big number. Okay, but the idea is you start at 0. Sometimes people don't like that. They typically want the 0 to be the most compact one, but that doesn't make any sense, because Ted's a really smart guy. He wouldn't do that. You start with your original image as 0, and then you keep filtering it down. All right? So that's our original image. The first thing we have is this reduce operator. Okay? And we're going to go over these in some detail. But the reduce operator essentially takes a Gaussian, that's the convolution signal, blurs it, and then this down arrow here means downsampling. So just taking every other pixel. That would give you level 1. Do it again, you would get level 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That one's sort of straightforward. And like I said, we'll go through the numbers in a minute. The one that's a little less clear is the expand operator. Remember, we have to expand these things up. So if I expand up the coarsed one, and then I subtract that from G1, that gives me L1. That gives me the first Laplacian. All right? The expand operator is a little less intuitive than the reduce operator. Let me show you what they are. The reduce operation is pretty clear. So the idea is at this level, we have a full resolution or whatever level, and then we want to take the next level down. So here's a way of thinking about it. We'll just number these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 pixels across. I actually don't have to produce the pixels that would go under 2, 4, 6, and 8, because I only want half the number of pixels that I had to start with. So in fact, what this does is it simply says I'm going to take some location, here I use the middle, and I'm going to take what's called a 5-tap filter, and here are the filters. See, it's 1/16, 4/16, 6/16, 4/16, 1/16, and that's what these numbers are. 1/16, 1/4, 3/8, 1/4, 1/16. Okay? That's the filter that I use to get the odd pixel here in the middle. Now, that's just in one scan line. I'm working with images. How do I do this? Okay, go way back in your notes, because I know you're all taking copious notes. I almost said y'all. When I say y'all, Megan's going to throw that monitor at me, okay? Nothing against my friends from the South, but I come from New York, went to school in Boston. If I actually said y'all, I think I'd get shot by my relatives. Anyway, you all have seen this before. We talked about separable filters, right? So a separable filter was, instead of applying a square filter or a 2D filter, I apply one-dimensional filter horizontally, and then often it's the same one-dimensional filter vertically. So go back up and remember about separable filters. The reduce operator uses a separable filter, a 5-tap separable filter, first in the rows, then in the columns. All right, that one was straightforward. The expand operator is a little bit trickier. And you can tell that by looking at this awful picture. In fact, I'm going to pull that awful picture out by itself. Here's the deal. The idea is that on this picture, only pixels that were real. The question is, how do you make finer pixels from a coarser level? So here's the coarser level, here's the finer level. And it turns out you do it two different ways, okay? So we're going to start with the odd pixels, all right? So the odd pixels occur underneath pixels that are actually there. So there are a couple of ways of thinking about this. One is we're just going to assume that I'm just tell you what the filter is, right? That it's 1/8, 3/4, 1/8, okay? That seems a little bit arbitrary until you realize that's just kind of like if these were zeros, okay, and I took in all the values here and I made it the same 5 tap before, but now doubled it, so 1/8, 1/2, 3/4, 1. These would be in the same ratio of 1, 4, 6, 4, 1 as before, okay? But I'm only pulling it off the odd pixels, all right? And so these points go away, and I'm only left with 1/8, 3/4, 1/8. By the way, we're going to provide the original Burt and Adelson paper that talks about reduce and expand, so you'll be able to look at that a little bit more carefully. All right. That's to reproduce a pixel that's actually underneath one that's there. Slightly trickier are the even pixels. We have a pixel here that's underneath something that didn't actually exist. So if I still do the 6, 4, 1, right, 1, 4, 6, 4, 1 above me, okay, well, when I'm on one of these even pixels, there's nothing directly above me, and there's nothing to my ends. There's only these two here. That's this one and this one. So looking 5 above me, only 2 of them are really there. They're equally distant from me. What coefficients am I going to use? I'm going to use 1/2. So to produce this finer value, I take 1/2 of that pixel and 1/2 the other. And that actually sort of makes sense. If you think about it, if I'm blowing up a picture, so I'm going to go from, say, 7 pixels to 14, I have to get space between 2 pixels that were there. What value should I put in that space? Halfway between the ones that were there before. Okay? The one that's a little trickier to understand is if I'm blowing it up, how come I just don't leave this original pixel alone? And you can read in the paper, this is for the odd pixels, you can read in the paper the motivation in terms of frequency theory in terms of how they do that. All you need to know is that you now have a reduce operator and an expand operator. You want to see something cool?
Yes.
Okay. Let me show you how come they got their paper on the cover. I think it was the ACM. I think it was a journal of the ACM. I forget. They had the cover picture of a journal, and here's why. Here's a picture of an apple. Okay? Beautiful picture of an apple. Here's a picture of an orange, and I'm going to tell you it's not just any picture of an orange. You'll notice that this apple is in front of some pencils, this orange is in front of some other pencils, kind of same colored background, and you'll notice they're the same size, and that's because they've been scaled to be the same size. Using the Laplacian pyramid stuff, I can make this picture. Okay, now if Megan could see this picture, Megan would be going, wow, how did they do that?
Wow, how did they do that?
Okay, first of all, I hope you are too. It's pretty cool. It's half orange, half apple, and it blends, and you can't see any seams. All right? And the way they did that is they built a Laplacian pyramid. So this is the coarser scales. This is the original Laplace scale, the coarser. And they just seamed together each one of the pyramids by just a single pixel, but at the small size, not at the expanded size. So at the very small one, they took half of the left half of the apple, the right half of the orange, and they just blended the middle row. Then they expand that, okay, take the Laplacian here, Laplacian there, combine that, add in with single row. You do that all the way down, and what you've done is you've blended the low frequencies over a larger range of the image and the high frequencies over a smaller range, and you make this magic apple orange thing. And that's how you get yourself on the cover of the transactions on ACM transactions on graphics. Cool, right? Now we're going to apply these pyramids to Lucas and Canati. So here's another really, really ugly picture. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to step you through the algorithm in a minute, but let me just show you sort of in drawing, okay? So First is, here's our image at t minus 1, here's our image at t.